I am Sara Rief. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Health and Wellness Committee for the CLA. Our committee was just started this year, right before the pandemic, and we are, of course, focused on bringing content to all of you to better lawyer well-being. So I'm going to handle any questions and answers. If you want to put those in the chat area when Dr. Lim finishes up, we can get to those. And I am going to hand it over to Gary, who's going to introduce Dr. Lim.
Hey, thanks, Sarah. Hey, welcome everybody. And a special thanks, in fact, let me just mention to the California Lawyers Association, because they've created this opportunity for us. We have a phenomenal infrastructure, and this information is not only free to attorneys in the state of California, but it's available to the public. So I think we're very, very appreciative for that. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Anthony Lim, who is the medical director of the McDougall Health Program in Santa Rosa, California, as well as a staff physician at TrueNorth Health Center and Kaiser Permanente in Santa Rosa. Just a little background. Dr. Lim grew up in San Diego. In fact, we had quite an interesting discussion about that. And he went to undergraduate school at Stanford, where he majored in biological science. And then he moved eastward and attended Harvard Law School. And in fact, he is a member of the California Bar, but he's of course inactive, he doesn't practice. And then he went to Boston University School of Medicine. He's board certified in family medicine, and his area of practice is lifestyle medicine, behavioral changes, and plant-based nutrition. Now, if that may sound strange to you, it seems strange to me about 10 years ago when I was diagnosed with a number of rather serious, significant chronic diseases that had been a problem in my family. And I was given the option of surgery and basically prescription drugs for the rest of my life. And that didn't sound very attractive. I went out, I read the China study. I read The Start Solution, which was authored by Dr. John McDougall, who founded the McDougall Center. And I'm forever grateful. And I really, really appreciate the fact that Dr. Lim is here today to discuss his practice with us. So welcome, Dr. Lim, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Gary. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with all of you today. Should we go ahead and get started then?
Let's go for it.
All right. Well, greetings, everyone. Thank you, Gary, for the nice introduction. Today, we are going to talk about one of my passions, which is a whole food plant-based diet, and how to radically transform your health. One thing, in the interest of full disclosure, I have not always eaten a healthy plant-based diet. All right. So this is a picture from childhood, and you probably would, most times when I quiz the audience, I don't have a live audience in front of me right now. So, but when I do quiz them, very few guess which one was me. But by the way I'm setting this up, you can probably imagine that this chubby little boy was me growing up. I was hands down the fattest or chubbiest kid in my grade, all the way growing up through fifth, sixth grade was when I finally started to lose weight. It's interesting, this is my cousin Patrick. He's now an internist in Boston. This is my older brother, Jonathan. And then these are my two girl cousins, Stephanie and Josephine. But I didn't get this way by accident. When you look at what I ate growing up, this was one of my favorite Friday treats, was a Wendy's chocolate Frosty. And when my parents would go out for dinner, my older brother, Jonathan, this was our go-to meal. He cooked for me Pillsbury croissants. Some of you probably have experienced those triangles that you fold up into a nice little mini croissant. And Costco before it was called Price Club, right? We would get the large boxes full of corned beef hash, and he would fry this up really nice and crispy till you get all that black on the bottom, nice carcinogenic stuff that we didn't realize was cancer causing. That was our go-to dinner, right? Whenever my parents went out. And then, as Gary mentioned, I did grow up in San Diego. There's a university town center in La Jolla, and they have a concession area, and Orange Julius was one of my favorites. We get a large Orange Julius, which I've done the calculation, contains 132 grams of sugar. Just to give you an idea of how much that is, 4 grams of sugar is 1 teaspoon. So I challenge all of you after this. Actually, I don't challenge you, but you can do the thought experiment of going and scooping 1 teaspoon of sugar and imagine putting that in your mouth. And if you want to, just to experience it, you could, because imagine now putting 33 of those. I mean, 1 teaspoon, you would already be gagging, and they put 33 teaspoons. So that's kind of what we, even like a Coke, a can of Coke has 46 grams of sugar. It's just part of the standard American diet. And corn dog, that was my favorite snack. And then, how I loved my banana splits. So this wasn't all I ate, but I didn't even think twice when I ate this stuff. And it's no surprise then that I was as chubby as I was when you combine that with hours and hours of television watching and fairly sedentary. Fortunately, I've turned over a new leaf, and over the years, I've gone through various, fad diets. I did the whole low-fat diet. I did, the paleo, ketogenic, low carb, all that stuff. And I finally had my aha moment, not till 2014. So if you had met me in 2013, you might have seen me at In-N-Out having like at that time I was kind of in the paleo phase. So you might have seen me going to In-N-Out and ordering an animal style burger, which is basically beef patty with cheese wrapped around with lettuce instead of the buns, because it's all about avoiding the carbs, right? But my aha moment came in 2014. Now I went to med school from 2006 to 2010, and then 2010 to 2013, I did family medicine. I attended Harvard from 2001 to 2005. So I graduated law school 2005. And you might be wondering why it took me 4 years. Well, I took a year off between my second and third year and taught 5th through 8th grade math through AmeriCorps in Dorchester. Bottom line, I was pretty lost and confused in my 20s and trying to find what the heck I wanted to do with my life. And so it took me through business, law, teaching, computer science, and then finally came full circle back to medicine because I was pre-med in my undergrad days. My wife, we were both pre-med. She basically went straight on to med school. I took this 8-year detour, but we both ended up at the same place. So my aha moment came in 2014, 1 year after finishing medical residency, when I was watching PBS. And I saw this gentleman come on the screen. His name's Dr. Joel Fuhrman. I'd never met him or heard of him before. And he mentioned 4 words that I'd never heard despite 7 years of medical training. And those words were whole food, plant-based. And he was making these just absolutely outrageous claims about the power of this thing called a whole food, plant-based diet to not just prevent, but actually reverse all the chronic illnesses that I was seeing on a day-to-day basis in my clinic. Obesity, heart disease, hypertension, hyperlipidemia or high cholesterol, autoimmune diseases. And he was saying that this has the potential to just reverse these. Needless to say, I was a little skeptical, but I did do the research. I went to the library and I checked out his book, Eat to Live. I watched a really good documentary, which I'm going to recommend to all of you, called Forks Over Knives. And then I attended a plant-based nutrition conference. And basically, that was it. Once I realized the huge amount of medical evidence that had been undisclosed to me during medical school and residency, supporting this thing called a whole food plant-based diet, I had the same reaction that every doctor has when they really learn about what this is, which is, why am I only learning about this now? And to go straight to the end of the story of why we're only learning about this now, at the end of the day, as you're no surprise, money talks, right? And there's not a lot of money in broccoli, right? The broccoli industry, cauliflower industry, these are not powerful industries. What are powerful industries? The meat industry, the beef industry, the chicken industry, the egg industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the healthcare industry. These are very powerful industries. So is it any surprise then that when I'm hearing about lectures and all this tends to be more of a focus on pharmaceuticals and medications than it is on reversing chronic illness with broccoli, cauliflower, and brown rice? It's actually not much of a surprise. But fortunately, I did learn about it. And so since 2014, this is what I have focused in on, is what I would call lifestyle medicine. In fact, I'm just getting ready to sit for the boards. There's now a new specialty of lifestyle medicine, and they actually have a board exam that I'm going to be taking next month. And it's looking at how to treat chronic illnesses, not only with nutrition, but through all the pillars of a healthy lifestyle that we now know based on the evidence. With this change in my own personal life, it naturally sort of outflowed to my professional life, right? And I just want to kind of point out that this is Boston University School of Medicine, right, where I attended from 2006 to 2010. And this is Santa Rosa Family Medicine Residency, where I was for 3 years, 2010 to 2013. And in the 7 years that I was in sort of the med school residency training realm, when I think about the paradigm from which I operated when it came to caring for patients, it really boils down to one word, and that word is management. Okay, it's management. So when I saw my obese patients or overweight patients who belonged to the now 70%, used to be 2/3, but now 70% of the American population is overweight or obese. So when I saw them, then my goal would be to encourage them to try to lose 5%, if possible, of their body weight. That would be like asking someone weighing 300 pounds to really work hard to try and get down to 285 pounds. And why? Well, if you can get down to 285 pounds, we know that all your cardiovascular risk factors are going to decrease. Your blood pressure is going to go down, blood sugars are going to go down, your weight's going to go down, your risk of heart disease is going to go down, right? But 285 is still significantly, for the average person of average height, say 5'10". I mean, you are still morbidly obese, right? So we've gone from very morbidly obese to just a little less morbidly obese. That's what I call kind of management, all right? Well, what about my diabetic or pre-diabetic patients that belong to the 50%? 1 out of every 2 US adults either has prediabetes or diabetes. And that's why we call it the diabesity epidemic, diabetes and obesity, diabesity epidemic. We don't talk, when I was in med school residency, we never talked about reversing diabetes. We talked about trying to get optimal blood sugars through the use of one or more medications, metformin, glyburide, glipizide, different types of insulin. Now they've got all these fancy new ones that have recently been approved by the FDA on the market. None of them address the root cause of diabetes. They all are kind of masking it. They're helping to lower your numbers, maybe helping to prevent complications, but not getting rid of the disease, all right? So again, management, right? This is what I was steeped in. This is the paradigm I was operating. Well, what about heart disease? You know, every 38 seconds, 1 US adult dies from cardiovascular disease, whether it be stroke or heart attack. And up until, you know, in the absence of a dietary lifestyle approach, our solution to this is medications, procedures, and surgeries, many of which have been shown to be ineffective. So when I was going through my training, interventional cardiologists were kind of the kings, right? Because they're the ones who are saving lives. They're putting stents in for someone with a severe blockage of their coronary arteries, the arteries that feed their heart. And wow, they're saving lives. Well, what we have now learned in these last couple of decades is that angioplasty and stents, which is threading, going through your arteries and putting in a catheter and a stent inside your coronary arteries to kind of help open up the blockage, that for people with chronic coronary artery disease, all right, we're not talking about an acute heart attack. If you have an acute heart attack, please go to the emergency room, and if they want to put a stent, because that can be life-saving. But we're talking about the person who gets some chest pain when they go exercise, and then when they rest, it goes away. And they go to their doctor and they put them on a treadmill, and then they go and look in with angioplasty and they see it's like 90% blockage. We're talking about these patients. Stents have been shown to have no benefit in terms of recurrent heart attacks, strokes, or overall length of time with which you live. Isn't that amazing? We spend billions of dollars on these procedures. We put in over 300,000 stents a year in the US alone. And the evidence has shown that they do absolutely nothing in terms of helping you out. That is our, US healthcare system. We are using medications, procedures, and surgeries to manage chronic illnesses. Now, let me show you my new paradigm from a plant-based nutrition perspective, all right, which is no longer management. And I like to tell stories, so I'm going to tell it to you through the story of Robert Smith. This is Robert Smith, a patient of mine who I first met in 2016. Now, Robert, in 2014, 2 years before I met him, weighed 298 pounds. His blood pressure was in the 150s over 90s. He was on 4 medications: Zetia, which is a cholesterol-lowering medication; Norvasc, which is an incredibly powerful blood pressure-lowering medication; Prestique, which is an antidepressant; and albuterol, which many of you are familiar with, is an inhaler. And he had intermittent asthma, or asthma when he even just walking a few blocks, he would get wheezy, and so he would need to use this asthma inhaler. And for this, in part for this reason, in addition to all his weight, he was very sedentary. He didn't move a lot. What you need to know about Robert is he had tried every diet you can imagine. He had tried the juice diet, he had tried Atkins, he had tried Weight Watchers, he had tried Medifast, he had tried everything. And as most diets go, they succeeded in the short term. He would always lose as 30, 40 pounds. But as most diets go, you regain the weight. Why? Because it's a diet. It's not a lifestyle, it's a diet, right? What I'm sharing with you today, I'm hoping becomes a lifestyle for you in the way that it has for me, in the way that it has for Gary, right? And we are not talking about a diet today. We're talking about diet only in the sense that this is the way that you're going to be eating. 2014, he learned about a whole food plant-based diet. Funny enough, right around the time that I learned about it, right? When I saw Joel Fuhrman come on the screen, that was summer of 2014, just over 6 years ago. And he decided this warrants giving it a try. Let's do it. And from 2014, he continued on this. Unlike his other diets, which he had gone on and then went off, he continued this all the way through to the time that I met him in 2016. And when I met Robert in 2016, this was who I met. It's like a completely different person. All right. 2016, he weighed 173 pounds. His blood pressure was in the 110s over 70s. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what a normal blood pressure is, in the US, we consider normal good blood pressure to be 120 over 80. But normal does not mean optimal. Optimal blood pressure is more along the lines of 110 over 70, just so you know. And look at his blood pressure, 110s over 70s, but most significant of all, off every single medication. So he was off his cholesterol-lowering medication with a total cholesterol less than 150, which is kind of our holy grail when it comes to cholesterol. I know many of you have seen your cholesterol reports, and if it's less than 200, that's considered normal. One of the lessons from today, normal does not mean optimal. there are still plenty of men and women in the United States with cholesterol levels between 150 and 200 who are having heart attacks and strokes, okay? He was off his Norvasc, or his blood pressure lowering medication, and he was, despite that, with optimal blood pressure. He was even off his antidepressant, which is not unusual that people start eating better, they start feeling better, their mood improves, they're able to get off in some cases, their psych medication. That's always the last thing I try to change, because there's enough variables when you're trying to change your diet. I don't want changing diet and trying to come off psych medications. But it's always noteworthy and something I celebrate when patients are able to successfully do so, as in Robert's case. And then last, not only was he off his albuterol inhaler, but he was running over 5 miles per day. In fact, this picture that I took of him was in the morning. And as you can see, if you look down at the bottom of the screen, he's got his running shoes on. This guy was ready to bolt out the door. He says if he does not run 5 miles a day, he feels so pent up with energy. This is going from someone who just 2 years earlier was a couch potato, and if he walked 2 blocks, had to use his asthma inhaler. This, what you're seeing here, this is no longer management, all right? This is just outright transformation. In fact, this is radical transformation. This is reversal. And this is now my new paradigm from which I operate. I don't care how heavy someone is. I don't care how many medications they're on. For the most part, in most cases, this is what is possible if he or she is willing to make the changes necessary in their lifestyle to achieve this. All right. And I like pictures. So this is kind of what I think of as the state of our current medical care system. This was a cartoon, not the exact same one, but one similar to it that was first introduced to me by Dr. Dean Ornish, who you're going to hear more about later. And what you see here are 2 doctors that are basically mopping up the floor, right? The floor is flooded, they're mopping up the floor, but there's only one problem, okay? If you look in the background, you see the faucet on full blast, right? So they're trying to mop up the floor while the faucet is on full blast. And that's exactly the problem, right? We are not addressing the root cause. We are mopping up the floor with our medications, with our surgeries, with our procedures. Now, don't get me wrong. I still prescribe medications. I still recommend patients get surgery, but I try to do so in its appropriate place where it's the last resort, not the first resort. Because in the past, when someone came in with high blood pressure and high cholesterol, my first thing was to give them medication. And then I kind of pay lip service to lifestyle, say, yeah, I try to eat healthier and exercise, right? Now, my first stop is like, let's do a real all-out trial of lifestyle first. If that is unsuccessful, then we can bring on medications as necessary to minimize your likelihood of developing any complications. There's a big difference, right? And so to me, what whole food plant-based nutrition is it's getting to the root cause of health and illness, and ultimately turning off the faucet so that we don't have to keep mopping up the floor. That was my little kind of just intro. In terms of the 3 objectives I have for today: 1, understand the basic principles of a whole food plant-based diet. 2, learn some of the major health benefits of a whole food plant-based diet. I use WFPB as an acronym. And then 3, get tips for how to get started adopting this plant-based diet. And then I should pause here. Gary or Sarah, what's my end time? Just so I know when people are expecting.
Yes, we're slated to go until 2-ish, but we can go a little over. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. That's plenty of time. Oh, I see, 2-ish. Right. Yeah. Okay. Right. Thanks. Okay. So first, let's understand the basic principles of a whole food plant-based diet. Now, I'm just going to tell you right off the bat that, and I know you can appreciate this as lawyers, is that I am a fan of simplicity, right? I do not like things more that are too complex. And I will tell you that the longer I have been practicing this kind of medicine, which is lifestyle medicine and focusing on nutrition, the more simple it really gets to me. and that's not complicated. All right. And so when you think about a whole food plant-based diet, I'm going to try to make it so simple that you will never forget what this involves. And it just seems infinitely intuitive. All right. And I want you to match up what you hear today with any other diet that you may be fixated on. I would be shocked if one of you right now is not doing some form of a low carb diet, right? Where you're eating bacon and eggs for breakfast and thinking that that's healthy because you held off on the toast. And you're having some form of like salad with tons of tuna on top and thinking, well, it's good because I left out the brown rice and the potatoes, right? So I want you to kind of think about the diet, whatever diet or thing that you think is the best, and then match it up with this, and not only look at the evidence, but think about what just kind of intuitively seems to make sense. All right. So I also do not like reinventing the wheel. And I feel like this gentleman, whose name is Michael Pollan, I think he really nailed it. I think he got it right when he described the optimal diet. And I have, since I went plant-based in 2014, this was what made the most sense to me. And it continues to be what I draw upon. And he wrote a book, In Defense of Food, An Eater's Manifesto. He's also the author of The Omnivore's Dilemma, many other books. And he's probably the most famous 7 words are these, which to me really capture what a whole food plant-based diet is. Number 1, eat food, right? And he likes to say, eat food that your great-great-great-grandmother would recognize as food, right? And food is food that's in as natural and minimally processed a state as possible, right? So Oreo cookies, even though Oreos are vegan, that's not food. It's been so heavily processed, it's not even recognizable as food. On the other hand, if we were to go out, I just started gardening this year. If we were to grab a tomato, right? That's real food. If we were to go pick one of my zucchinis, right? That's real food. If you were to get a piece, now, just to be fair, if you were to have a piece of salmon, as long as it's just grilled salmon, that would be considered, Michael Pollan would consider food, right? Because that's basically in its whole form. On the other hand, Kentucky Fried Chicken, sorry, I apologize for my dog in the background. That's no longer, we're going on the less food spectrum because it's been deep fried. There's oftentimes some breaded stuff around it. You've totally changed the nature of it, right? So when we talk about eating food, it's not an either or, it's really a spectrum. And the idea is that you want to eat as much food that is whole, unprocessed, minimally processed food, as opposed to heavily processed. Not rocket science, right? Other ways he puts it is food that's grows on a plant, as opposed to food that's made in a plant, right? Which inevitably takes you to the outside of the grocery store versus the inside where you're getting all sorts of packaged things. All right, so those are the first 2 words. Next 3 words, not too much. I'm just gonna say it, we are kind of a gluttonous society, right? We eat extravagant meals that are incredibly calorically dense until we are stuffed, right? And this idea of not too much is really just showing some sort of moderation, eating till we're satiated, not stuffed. There is a difference. It's eating till you're comfortably full, right? You could eat more, but you certainly don't need to. And then the last 2 words, which really is where we get the plant-based part, is mostly plants. Now notice Michael Pollan didn't say exclusively plants. So I'm gonna, again, in the interest of full disclosure, I am not vegan, right? In fact, there's not a single food that I consider absolutely prohibited from me eating, right? But when I think about if over the course of a year, a week, a day, what I eat, 90% of what you see coming into my mouth is going to be a whole plant food or minimally processed plant food, right? And that 10% is all that other stuff that I enjoy having that flexibility. Like say it's someone's birthday and they have a cake. I like to be able to have a little piece, right? And because I'm at a healthy weight, because my blood pressure, cholesterol, all of those numbers are optimal and I'm not on any medication for them, then by every health metric that matters to me, I am meeting it despite not being 100% plant-based. And I'm happy with that. So for any of you who came onto this call fearing that I'm going to tell you can never eat another piece of cheese or meat or cake or pie or turkey on Thanksgiving ever again, that's not what you're going to hear from me. What I want to do is move the needle in a very significant way in terms of what you eat. All right. So this talk is not about being on a plant-based diet and off a plant-based diet. Rather, I would think about it as moving more towards a whole food plant-based diet and at each stage continuing that journey. All right. It's more shades of gray to me than it is black and white. Compare that for a minute, what I just described as eat food, not too much, mostly plants, all right, with the current state of the American diet, which is horrific, right? Because right now, this current state of the American diet, remember those first two words, eat food? We've got 63% of the American diet that is not food, that is heavily processed with a lot of added fat, oil, sugar, salt. Another 25% is animal-based foods and products. The average American eats over 200 pounds of meat a year. That is a hefty amount of meat. I stepped on the scale this morning, I weighed 144 pounds. So that's like, that's like eating 1.5 of me a year, which is, more meat than anyone ever needs in a year. Okay, I know Americans are obsessed with protein, but this is contributing to part of the woes or the broken state of our healthcare system that we are seeing and experiencing. And then that leaves only 12% dealing with those foods that I promoting, which are these whole plant foods, except that half of this is things like ketchup or apple pies or spinach in the spinach souffle. So when you take out that, then really we've got about 6% that is actually like really unprocessed plant-based foods, right? So I told you that I'm at like 90%. The average American's at 6%. So you can see why I don't make a big deal that everyone has to be 100%, because for some people having to be 100% scares them from even making a move in this direction. Whereas I'm like, you couldn't do much worse than what we're currently doing. So any traction that we make in this direction is a movement in the right direction. And you don't have to look far to see what I'm saying is true, right? Everywhere you go, fast food everywhere. You go to Best Buy or CVS or wherever, and you're just surrounded by candy in the checkout aisle. I took this picture at the Sonoma County Fair a few years ago, the home of the Krispy Kreme burger, because a cheeseburger is just not decadent enough, right? We have to up the ante. We have to sandwich this cheeseburger with 2 Krispy Kreme donuts. I mean, if you watch television, each commercial from these fast food places, really what you're seeing is we have to keep increasing the level of stimulation. Now we've got to make pizzas that have cheese built into the crust, right? Or we have to have tacos that are made of Doritos, and have cheese sandwiched between the Dorito shells. It's unbelievable, but it's like drugs, right? Once you build up a certain tolerance to a certain level, it's no longer exciting. So what's the natural thing? You up the ante. You just get more of it. And so we're caught in this vicious cycle. This I also took at the fair. A Krispy Kreme burger is best finished off with deep fried Oreos or deep fried Snickers, of course, right? Because a Snickers bar, that's just not exciting enough. All right, now in contrast, these are the 4 food groups of a whole food plant-based diet. Whole grains, right? So amaranth, buckwheat, barley, quinoa, brown rice, oats, wheat, right? There's a whole wide world of whole grains just waiting for us. And most of us just know wheat and rice and oats maybe, but there's a lot of variety there. Fruits, all colors, sizes, varieties. Vegetables, right? You can think of your cruciferous vegetables, which are huge cancer fighters like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, broccoli. Those are massive cancer fighting vegetables. That's your cruciferous. Then you've got your gorgeous leafy greens, so your spinach, your kale, your Swiss chard. And then you've got your other vegetables, whether it's cucumber or onions, tomatoes, etc. But I like to eat from all these categories. And then major power categories of legumes: beans, peas, lentils. I know that legumes have gotten some negative press in recent years. There's a book put out called The Plant Paradox by a doctor. It's very unfortunate because legumes are the cornerstone of many long-living populations around the world for their diet, right? Is these beans, peas, and lentils. So I know of tons of studies that have shown the benefits of this. I don't know of any good study that shows any long-term mal-effect of eating beans. So I would just kind of put those myths out of your mind. And these are the 4 fruit groups that comprise the vast majority of my diet. So for breakfast, it's going to be steel-cut oats with blueberries, bananas. I use my sweetener is my banana. I just mash a ripe banana into it, so I don't have to put any added sugar. And then maybe I'll sprinkle some walnuts on top. I made a massive batch of minestrone soup the other day. Actually 2 batches, and it just lasted me the entire week. It lasted my kids, my wife. I mean, I'm a big fan of batch cooking. I don't have a lot of time to cook, so when I cook, I like to cook large batches of food. Beautiful salads, right? And you can make them interesting. You can put beans and you can put some avocado. Not too much avocado, but you can put some avocado and just give it some pizzazz with parsley or cilantro, right? This is an example. This is not one I made. I just got it online. But this is an example of what these Buddha bowls, where you just put a bunch of different types of vegetables and grains and beans together into a beautiful bowl. And that could easily be a lunch or dinner. I work at Kaiser, right? And this is a pictorial of what they have of a typical plant-based plate. You can see half the plate is some grilled vegetables, and they've got some quinoa and some black beans. Now, some of you may be looking at this and be like, this does not look exciting to me because you're used to, like, I don't know, a steak or a burger or a Chick-fil-A. And so this compared to that. But let me tell you, after a couple of weeks of eating this way, you really don't want to go back because you just feel so good. You can tell your body's changing. In fact, right now, right before this Zoom session, I've been on with about 15 or 16 patients that we're running an online McDougall program right now. And they're about 6 days into the online program. And oh my gosh, their weight's dropping. Most of them are already in 6 days off the vast majority of their blood pressure medications with beautiful blood pressures. It can work that quickly if you make significant changes. They're already dropping weight, and we're just seeing all sorts of good benefits happening. And at the end of the day, they say nothing tastes as good as healthy feels, right? So when you start to feel really healthy, then and your taste buds start adapting, this starts to just become your food and what you want to eat. Fruit is your dessert, right? Instead of some sweet, some baked goods, some pie, some cake, 90% of the time, fruit is your dessert, right? Now, it's important to keep in mind, some of you may be saying, well, what's the difference between vegan and whole food plant-based? Well, first, I've already told you, whole food plant-based to me does not mean that you never eat meat or dairy again. There are many plant-based professionals out there frame it as such. They basically say never eat meat, never eat dairy, never have these processed sweet things ever again. You know, I like to enjoy life, and I don't. That's not my aim. Is sort of this standard of perfect 100% plant-based. So I don't necessarily agree with that. All right. So that's one difference. But then the second difference is that vegan can have highly processed foods. As long as there's no animal product, that's considered vegan. So, you know, you could have white bread with, I can't believe it's not butter. You could have Fruit Loops, you could have French fries and Oreos, and you could have Coke. These are all vegan foods. Doesn't mean it's healthy, right? So I have many patients who eat a vegan or vegetarian diet who are obese, hypertensive, riddled with clogged arteries, and diabetic, right? And that's why it's all the components of the name that matter. Whole food, which is the eat food, plant-based, which is mostly plants, right? And it's really the marriage of those two things together that makes this diet or this way of eating so impactful and potent. So these are the things really that you just don't want to eat. This is actually a food pyramid from Dr. Joel Fuhrman. And as you can see, he himself is not saying that you can never eat these foods ever again. It's just notice where these foods are, these richer foods. They're at the top of the pyramid. They're the sliver. They're the condiment. Whereas what's at the base? Tons of vegetables, beans, starches, whole grains, potatoes, small amount of seeds, nuts, and fruits. Now, different plant-based professionals have different weightings of these. So for example, Dr. McDougall, my mentor, he puts these whole grains and potatoes, he puts those at the bottom of the pyramid because he says that's what makes us happy. That's what keeps us satiated. That's what all the civilizations prior to us have eaten is starch as their sustenance. So for him, he would put those at the bottom. You know what, at the end of the day, I just split the difference. My plate is 50-50. Typical plate for me will have brown rice, and some black beans being half the plate, and then the other half the plate being vegetables of different sort with, what do I have for, I'll have a Bosque pear. My wife just bought some Bosque pears yesterday. That'll be my dessert, right? It's not the exact proportions that matter. What matters is that you're getting the vast majority of your calories from those four groups: fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains. This is the big question that may be on many of your minds. Well, if I don't eat meat, or if I barely eat meat, or minimal amount, how am I going to get adequate protein? Well, on kind of a funny level, you know, this is a picture I took at the San Diego Zoo. And you never want to come face to face or go head to head with a silverback. This is a silverback here. You don't think of the silverback as deficient in muscle, right? But what is the silverback eating? I mean, they're eating leaves, right? 98% of a gorilla's diet is plants. The other 2% might be some insects that they get in. So they're eating a plant-based diet. In fact, I went to San Francisco Zoo with my kids the other day. All the animals there, whether it's the rhino or the hippo or the elephant, right? These are all predominantly herbivores. You're not asking yourself where they get their protein and how they're so strong. So if we're not asking for them, then why are we asking it for us? You know why we're asking? Because the meat industry has done an amazing job of making us believe that the only way to get adequate protein into our body is by eating animal-based products. And it's simply not true. In fact, if we now go to the sports realm, this is Tom Brady, one of the most decorated, considered one of the best quarterbacks of all time. He eats a plant-based diet. He's not vegan, but he attributes part of his longevity in the NFL to the fact of his diet, which is over 80%, those groups that we just talked about: fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains, right? Is Kyrie Irving, one of the top NBA players, and he moved to a plant-based diet. You know, there's a quote from him: been on more of a plant-based diet, getting away from the animals and all that. I had to get away from that. So my energy is up. My body feels amazing. He lost quite a decent amount of weight and really felt like his playing improved. Damian Lillard is another one. And I highly recommend that if you're at all curious after this talk, that it's piqued your curiosity in terms of learning more, I highly, highly recommend that you watch this film called The Game Changers. It's free on Netflix. And it basically profiles top Olympic athletes, NFL athletes, the Tennessee Titans, in fact, weightlifters who all eat 100% plant-based, and yet are considered at the top of their game. But where are they getting their protein? They're getting them from the plants. Right? I have yet to meet a single patient eating a well-balanced, whole food plant-based diet who have ever said, you know what, you're protein deficient. We need to have you start eating meat. Industry has done an amazing job in brainwashing us, and you've got to sort of just kind of break away from that sort of fixed way of viewing the world. All right, how am I doing? Ooh. All right, learn some of the major health benefits of a whole food plant-based diet. So just to recap, simple, right? When you leave this talk, if there's 7 words you remember, eat food. So I'm going to avoid all this processed stuff, not too much. So I'm not going to eat tons of stuff, mostly plants. It's going to be fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains. That's what I want the bulk. That's it. I told you, simple. And you want to, by eating food, that means that all the stuff like all the oil, all the salt, all the sugar, right? That stuff's, I mean, where does olive oil come from? Olives. Where does avocado oil come from? Avocados, right? Where does corn oil come from? Corn. So why do you wonder where you're going to get your fat from if you eliminate oil? You're going to get them from the very foods that which you get oil. So we just don't need concentrated oil. Now, if you want to use concentrated oil for small little things and you know what you're getting into, then fine. But that's very different from kind of this mentality of just liberally dousing your food in olive oil, thinking that it's a health food, which it is not. All right, it is not. Learn some of the major health benefits of a whole food plant-based diet. For the sake of time, I'm going to kind of fly through this, but this is Dr. Shintani, who was very troubled by the fact that Native Hawaiians were amongst the most obese, sick populations in the country. When he looked back 100 years ago, they were very fit, didn't struggle with obesity or diabetes, and he attributed it to the standard American diet. And so he looked back at what they used to eat, things like taro, which is a starchy vegetable, kind of like potato, breadfruit, poi, which is liquefied taro, sweet potato leaves, and papaya. And he said, I need to put them back on their native Hawaiian foods, right? And then let's see what happens. And so he did that. He took like 20 native Hawaiians, and for 3 weeks, he let them eat as much food as they wanted. No dietary restriction in terms of portion control, no calorie counting. And he wanted to see what happened. They could eat as much of this sweet potato papaya as they wanted. I mean, how often do you see diets where they say, yeah, eat as much food as you want, don't count calories? You never see that. It's always some sort of calorie counting. It's always some sort of portion control. That is not the case here. Well, first off, just by changing up the food, even though they were allowed to eat as much food as they wanted, their total caloric intake decreased by 40%, from about 2,600 calories per day to 1,600 calories per day. Not surprisingly, in 21 days, they lost on average 17 pounds. Their BMI, which is looks at your weight relative to your height, decreased from an average of 40 to 37. Healthy BMI is 18.5 to 25. I'm 5'8", between 140 and 145 pounds. So my BMI is about 21. When I told you that 7 out of 10 Americans are overweight or obese, that means 7 out of 10 Americans have a BMI greater than 25. I can't see you all, but I would bet, just based on the percentages, that 7 out of 10 of you, if you go into online and put in a calculator, and you calculate your height and weight, that probably 7 out of 10 of you would have a BMI greater than 25. And that's just one indication to you that whatever I'm doing dietary wise is not helping me to achieve optimal health. Right? Cholesterol dropped on average 31 points. LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, dropped 17 points. Triglycerides dropped almost 100 points. Was this a year? No, it was 21 days, 3 weeks. I told you this stuff works fast. Fasting blood sugar dropped by, on average, 39 points. Systolic blood pressure dropped 12 points. Diastolic blood pressure dropped 9 points. And this doesn't even take into account all the anecdotal improvements in terms of their symptoms of arthritis, asthma, gastritis, fatigue, acne, headaches, impotence. Remember, this doesn't just improve your numbers, you just feel better. Right? That was the common thing I was hearing from my patients who I just spoke with this morning, right from this computer that you see me at. By the way, that background is my backyard. My bookcase is a mess, so I didn't want you to be too distracted by sort of admiring my messy bookcase. And so all of these are basically cardiac risk factors. Why do we care about blood pressure? Why do we care about cholesterol? Because we don't want to have a heart attack or a stroke. That's really why we care, right? We don't want to die young. So when we look at heart disease, keep this in mind. Coronary artery disease is the #1 killer of men and women in the United States and now globally. The #1 killer. You just heard my statistic. Every 38 seconds, one American dies from cardiac. I mean, we're freaking out about COVID, right? If you really want to know enemy number one is heart disease. I mean, that's a lot of needless deaths that do not need to happen. Right? You've already seen just in 3 weeks how much people's cardiac risk factors could go down. All right. And if one thing that I really want you to take away is that for the #1 killer of men and women in the United States and globally, no other pattern or way of eating has ever demonstrated the ability to reverse the #1 killer except for a whole food plant-based diet. So even if paleo, ketogenic, I don't know, Atkins, whatever is your diet of the day, diet du jour, all right, even if you can achieve some sort of short-term benefit in terms of weight loss, how can that stack up against a way of eating that has been shown to be able to reverse the #1 killer of men and women in the United States over the long term, right? And where do we get this from? Well, one titan in the field was that gentleman I mentioned earlier, Dr. Dean Ornish. He was on the cover of Newsweek for this lifestyle heart trial that he did, where he took, this was back in the late 80s, early 90s, he took 48 patients with moderate to severe coronary artery disease, and he randomized half of them to just usual care with their cardiologist, eat an American Heart Association diet, try to eat more chicken and fish and less red meat, versus 24 who he randomized to healthy lifestyle, which was a whole food plant-based diet, moderate amount of exercise, some techniques for reducing stress, and then group connection. So they would all meet on a regular basis to share with each other as a group. And that is important, right? Community is very important. And the objective was to determine the effect of comprehensive lifestyle change without cholesterol-lowering drugs on coronary artery disease and cardiac events. Right? Well, as you can see here, these black circles represent the control group. And what you see here on the y-axis is percent stenosis, or percent narrowing of the coronary arteries, which they determine through angiograms, right, where they inject dye through your coronary arteries and see how well it gets through. So what this is saying is that the higher it is, the more blocked your arteries. So over the 5 years that these trials were done, the control group, it worsened from 40.7% blocked to 51.9% blocked. In contrast, the intervention group, which was given the plant-based diet and some stress reduction, theirs went down from 41.3% to 37.3%. Now notice it didn't go to zero, and I wouldn't expect it to, because much of this blockage are what we call stable plaques. They're calcified. It's basically like scar tissue, right? So no matter how many leaves of spinach you eat, it's not going to reverse kind of well ingrained plaque, all right? But notice there was no progression, unlike the control group. And even though it didn't go down to zero, it still went down compared to where it started from. Well, what about clinically? How did they do? The control group had 2.5 times more cardiac events as defined as MI, which is myocardial infarction or heart attack, angioplasty, that procedure I mentioned where they'll put a stent in CABG, or coronary artery bypass graft surgery, where they hook you up to machines and then basically take a vein from your leg and use that to bypass the blockage. It's usually typically an open heart surgery. It's a major intervention. Cardiac hospitalizations or cardiac deaths. The control group had 2.5 times the rate of these events than the intervention group. And last, the people that adhered the most to these lifestyle recommendations had the greatest change in their narrowing of their arteries, which is essentially just saying the more you do, the better your results, not rocket science. But it also says it's not an all or nothing, right? You can get benefits even with small changes. If you want bigger benefits, then you need to make bigger changes. This is another giant in the field of plant-based nutrition. His name's Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. He's a general surgeon at Cleveland Clinic. And he did some landmark trials with patients with severe heart disease. This was just one of his patients. In 1996, you can see the widowmaker artery, the distal left anterior descending, severely blocked towards the end of it. And then after just almost 3 years on a plant-based diet, when they did a repeat, you can see that it's opened up nicely, right? That narrowing has essentially gone away. And so it's, his patients were ones who they have basically said, who were at death's door. And through a radical change in diet, the vast majority of them were able to live 10, 15 years or longer. So it's for this reason, and just in case any of you are wondering, thinking, well, this is kind of like woo-woo medicine, this is way out there. I'm here to tell you this is actually very mainstream. It's just that not all mainstream doctors have adopted it, right? But Dr. Kim Williams, he's the former president of the American College of Cardiology, and he himself had his epiphany moment many years ago where he realized that he was not taught about the benefits of this way of eating, and when he finally learned from them, there was no going back for him. He has his own story of his miraculous health improvements, which I won't get into today, but suffice it to say, this is now how he eats and how he recommends his patients eat. And he said this: wouldn't it be a laudable goal of the American College of Cardiology to put ourselves out of business? He means that a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but you get the idea, right? This is so powerful that you're not going to have a lot of cardiac patients if you're doing it this way, if you're eating this way. I just want to briefly mention, we've only talked about heart disease and some of the risk factors. But diabetes, this is a gentleman, there's tons of studies showing the benefits of plant-based nutrition for diabetes. I just wanted, again, a story. This is Eric Adams, the president of the Brooklyn Borough. He had a hemoglobin A1C of 17%, which is insanely high, all right? That's like, the threshold for diagnosis of diabetes is an A1C, which is an average of your blood sugars over the last 2 to 3 months, is 6.5%. So can you imagine an A1C of 17%? That's off the charts. I don't know if I've ever even had a patient with an A1C that high. But he was a former police officer. He said he ate donuts and hot dogs. That was his A1C. He went on a plant-based diet, and look at him now. His A1C dropped within 2 months from over 17% to less than 6%. I think it was 5.7. He reversed his diabetes in 2 months, and all the complications he was experiencing reversed as well. So he actually just wrote a book called Healthy at Last. And just briefly, the mechanism for diabetes, glucose requires insulin, okay, to get inside our cells. But when our cells have excess fat, which is called intramyocellular lipid, it's like putting gum in your door lock and trying to get in. The insulin, which is the key, it has to work a lot harder to get in, right? That's the effect of excess fat in our diet getting into our cells and kind of gunking up the entire cellular machinery. So what's the way to reverse diabetes? You stop eating the animal-based foods, you stop putting the oil in, and the intramyocellular lipids, or the fats inside our cells, just kind of dissolves. And we get back to a healthy state. And guess what happens? Our insulin starts to work better and our blood sugar levels go down. And it's for that reason, diabetes is honestly one of my favorite diseases to treat because the results are so dramatic. I'm going to skip that trial. And one more thing I'll mention, we've kind of talked about a bunch of studies, but what about just the real world? Well, when we look at the real world, there's this really amazing book called The Blue Zones written by Dan Buettner. And the blue zones are areas around the world that have a high percentage of centenarians, or people living past the age of 100. And so he identified 5 blue zones: Loma Linda, California, Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, Sardinia, Italy, Icaria, Greece, and Okinawa, Japan. And he interviewed over 260 centenarians from these 5 blue zones. And what did they all share in common? They shared a bunch of things in common, but one of the 9 power principles that he calls it that they shared, they ate a whole food plant-based diet. None of them were vegan, okay, except a small percentage of Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda. But none of them were vegan, but all of them ate 90 to 95% of their calories from the food groups I just mentioned: fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains, with maybe a small amount of nuts and seeds. Okay. So I think that's really significant, because we want to know like how this is working in the real world, and that's what we see in the real world, that this works, and it works well. Dr. McDougall, as I mentioned, all large populations of trim, healthy people throughout verifiable human history have obtained the bulk of their calories from starch. So in the last 2 or 3 minutes, how do I get started adopting this if I'm at all interested? Well, number one is keep learning. Don't just take it from me. My goal solely today is to pique your curiosity, right? And then have you continue to go down this road, because you can't read more about this and not find yourself becoming more and more convinced, right? It's so compelling. So one of my favorite documentaries is called Forks Over Knives, and it's probably one of the defining documentaries of the whole food plant-based movement. This is one of my favorite books. It's called The Whole Foods Diet by John Mackey. He's a good friend of Dr. McDougall's. He's the co-founder and CEO of Whole Foods Market, who, by the way, sends their sickest employees every year to the McDougall program because they've seen the financial return from getting their employees healthy. So here we have an example of a company, and then another company called CenturyLink, now called Lumen, the 3rd largest telecom company in the US. Since 2015, they've been sending their sickest employees to us. So, companies don't send employees and pay for them if they're not getting a return on their investment. The Starch Solution, one of Dr. McDougall's more recent well-known books. Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease by Dr. Esselstyn. Any of you worried about heart disease, this is the book to get. He's that surgeon at Cleveland Clinic. If you really want to take it to the next mile, you could attend a plant-based conference. There's a lot of them out there now. This is one of the most well-known, the International Plant-Based Nutrition Healthcare Conference. Step 2, you got to try it yourself. Just give yourself 21 days. And I'd say for those 3 weeks, what do you have to lose? Do it 100%. So for 3 weeks, just eat whole plant food. Stay away from processed stuff, stay away from animal products, see how you feel. I have never, ever, ever had a patient do this for 3 weeks and say like, oh, I regret that. That was the worst mistake I ever made. My blood pressure's higher, I feel worse, I'm heavier, my cholesterol, never, right? They always have learned something. They may not be ready to adopt that way of life, but it's been eye-opening for them. But the only way it can be eye-opening is if you experience it yourself. So give yourself 3 weeks, give it a start. This is one that is put out by Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. It's called the 21-Day Vegan Kickstart. You can download it on your iPhone, and it can kind of basically guide you through how to do this. But that book I mentioned too, The Whole Foods Diet, they have like a 21-day plan. So you can get guidance from there as well. This is Mark Bittman. He's many of you know, he's a famous cook and columnist for New York Times. He wrote How to Cook Everything. He had one of those wake up visits to his doctor where he said, Mark, you're getting heavy, your blood pressure's up, your cholesterol's up. If you don't start making changes, you are set up for a heart attack. That was his wake up call, but he was a gourmand. I mean, he ate everything. And so he could not give up all his meat and all of that. So his compromise is that he came up with this book or this concept, BB6. Until 6 p.m., I eat 100% whole plant food. With dinner, I might have a small amount of healthy, well-prepared animal-based protein, like 3 ounces or something. And I thought that's reasonable. Remember, I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to do this. Just remember, the more you do, generally, the better your results. But the rest is up to you. And then last, and hopefully really my ultimate hope, is that you eat a whole food plant-based diet the rest of your life, and that this becomes a lifestyle, just a way of eating, a way of being, not a diet. And, you know, Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, he said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. He had it right. He said that over 2,000 years ago. And somehow, somewhere along the way, I think due to big industry, corporate interests, you know, all of that, we've lost our way. We've lost our way, and we've forgotten the basic healing properties of a red delicious apple, steamed broccoli, bowl of brown rice, you know, a bowl of oatmeal. We've lost sight of just how powerful those healing properties can be. But hopefully with this talk, it's the start of you getting back to basics. And I'll just end, these were two of my patients, Jason and Sara Ramos. They had tried many things before, finally adopted a plant-based diet. And then when I saw them 2 years after they made the transition, this is now their new lifestyle that they have embarked on, and their new selves. Really just kind of unbelievable. These are the kind of pictures you expect after like gastric bypass surgery in the first year, maybe after gastric, because I see all the failed gastric bypass surgeries 4 or 5 years later. Why? Because they don't actually change their thinking or their eating behavior, right? So we are, in summary, we are not doing well as a nation in terms of health. Medications, procedures, and surgeries are not the answer. It's simply mopping up the floor. To turn off the faucet, we must adopt a whole food plant-based diet based on the 4 groups I mentioned. It has not only a potential to prevent, but actually reverse chronic illnesses, such as heart disease and diabetes. And hopefully your next step will be to continue learning, try it out yourself, and ultimately adopt this as a lifestyle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lim. We have some questions if we can get them quickly answered. I know we're a little over everyone's time, but I know that these are important questions people want answered. So one of them I thought is a great one is, what are your feelings regarding frozen vegetables instead of fresh vegetables?
Love them. Love them. I've got a bunch of frozen vegetables in the freezer right now. In some ways, they're even better because they lock them in at the peak of their, you know, freshness and ripeness. Where sometimes you go to the grocery store, you get the old wilted vegetables. So absolutely. And you just want to, just make sure that they're not frozen and they've been prepared with all sorts of oil, that it's really just the frozen vegetables. But there's no reason to not use frozen vegetables.
Canned beans or canned, you know, crushed jarred tomatoes, are those processed foods or whole foods?
Those are generally whole foods. But what you have to watch out for is what did they can it with, okay? So when I buy beans, like I got a bunch of beans from Costco, generally I'm looking for the whole bean, no other things, and no to minimal salt. And because a lot of these canned beans have a lot of salt. And even if it has a lot of salt, that's not a deal breaker. You just gotta drain them and rinse them off. But you really don't wanna be getting too much excess salt. But that's very much whole food. And then same with canned tomatoes. It's basically taking the tomato and just dicing it, right? So yes, is it processed? Yeah, it's been processed in that sense. But when we think of process, think of 2 things. What have I taken out and what have I put in? If you've just taken a tomato and mashed it, yes, you've changed the composition, right? The bonds between it, but you haven't taken anything out and you haven't added anything in. Whereas in contrast with certain things, you like white bread, right? You take out the fiber, which is like the cornerstone of longevity and health. And then you might put in a bunch of crap. If you want to make a pastry, you might put in sugar and butter and all that. So you put in a bunch of unhealthy things and you've taken out the healthy thing. That's the kind of processing that we want to avoid. So canned tomatoes, I've got a bunch of canned tomatoes. I mean, the staples, if you want to think about the staples is to be having a bunch of beans, grains, your emergency foods that are the canned beans, you know, canned tomatoes. You want to have lots of whole wheat pastas that you can just, you know, cook in a moment's notice. A lot of fruits that are going to be snacks and desserts. You know, those are the kind of things you want to fill your pantry with.
Okay, great. And this was, I thought, a very great question too, as I think we all, with your statistics, we all have somebody in our life, a family member or a friend that is obese, but might be resistant to talking about making these kinds of changes. how do we maybe encourage or introduce a friend or family member into this lifestyle?
Tread very carefully. I've kind of coined a phrase that I think kind of captures the various considerations at play, and I call it compassionate authenticity. Right? Compassionate authenticity. So the authenticity piece is, I'm not a believer in not being yourself. So if you've adopted this way of eating and this is how you eat, I'm not a fan of you hiding it. All right. But the compassionate part is sensing what the other person is willing and ready to hear. And if you can maybe put like, oh, I've adopted this kind of way of eating, I'm feeling great. And if they're like kind of like closed off to it, that is not someone you want to be kind of engaging unless you want to practice your adversarial, lawyerly skills. But considering that when I went to Harvard, my whole focus was mediation, you kind of get my personality, which is, can't we all just get along? That was when I learned that to get into mediation, I've got to do 3 decades of litigation. So I'm basically like, I have to fight in order to then become the peacekeeper. I guess law is not my right fit. So that's what I would say is the best way you are going to convince the people around you is to do it yourself and to show the results and just get people's curiosity that way. And if people ask you questions, then to kind of respond. But I would not at all recommend to kind of shove it in their face. Like, do you know what you're eating? Do you know how toxic that is for you? Dr. Lim told me that that's clogging up your arteries. I can't believe you eat. Yeah, that you're not going to win any friends, nor are you going to help bring them over to this way of eating. Just do it yourself. But don't compromise too on how you eat. That's the authenticity part. I see so many people, they blame their eating patterns on someone else. Like, oh, I would have had brown rice and broccoli, but my friends made this and I didn't feel like I could turn it down. Like, I didn't want to offend them. I'm like, all right, come on, if they're a good friend and you tell them what you're trying to do, and which is avoid dying from a heart attack young, and so you're all this, then if they can't accept that, it's probably a friend then that you want to maybe spend less time with.
Somebody has asked if you have any nutritional suggestions for women that are on a WFPB lifestyle to prevent osteoporosis.
Yes, my number one recommendation for people on a WFPB lifestyle for preventing osteoporosis is weight-bearing exercise. Okay, is weight-bearing exercise. So I'm not worried that your bones are going to get weaker by eliminating the meat and all that. In fact, there's a lot of good evidence to suggest you may be helping it, because meat can be fairly kind of like acidic in nature, and so it can actually draw calcium from your bones, and you pee it out in your urine. But just in general, meat eater, omnivore, vegan, plant-based eater, the one thing we lack in this country is weight-bearing exercise, right? We're so much more sedentary. And so bones respond to stress. That's why astronauts, one of their risks is osteoporosis, because there's no gravity. So they're just kind of, ooh, and their bones and muscles aren't having to, counteract anything. And so they can get weak. So do things like squats and burpees and push-ups and, planks, all those things that will kind of help build an overall sense of tone, muscle, and strong bones.
And then someone was asking about they must be a kefir drinker, probiotics and kefir. Is that something that you can incorporate into this kind of lifestyle?
Yeah, you can. The things you want to watch about with kefir is, first, the most important thing when you're talking about gut flora is the prebiotic, not the probiotic. So the probiotic is like the bacteria getting in the kefir and all that, right? That's nice. But what you really want is to feed the bacteria of your gut the right stuff. And that's called the prebiotic. So by eating the grains, the legumes and all, you're going to cultivate a bacteria that is going to serve you well in the long run. And so these kefir, these probiotics, they're not really greatly evidence-based. And they can oftentimes, the kefir can be loaded with sugar. I've seen some of them, So I'm not against you having that occasionally. I just don't want you to be putting too much stock in that and having that be a staple, especially if it's high in sugar.
And let's see, what are your thoughts about processed plant foods like Impossible or Beyond Meats that we have seen taking sort of a big popularity?
Okay, I'm really glad you asked that. So it's one of the biggest dangers of these new creations is that people generally think, if you go around the US, people generally think vegan equals healthy. Okay, vegan equals healthy, which means if you come out with a vegan burger from Burger King, that's a healthier substitute than a burger. So I'll make it very simple. From a planetary health perspective and from an animal well-being factory farming perspective, which are two major considerations that also support a whole food plant-based diet, great. Impossible Burger, Beyond Meat Burger, definitely the right choice. If you're talking purely from a physical health perspective, without those considerations, if it were me, give me a real beef burger. I'm purely from a physical health perspective, because at least that's real food. These Impossible Burgers, this is Franken food. I mean, they're coming up with things to give it a bloody, a blood-like appearance because people want that. And these are creations done in a laboratory. So great for people who want to prove to themselves that they can survive without meat as like a transitional step. Great for people who deplore the plight of the cows that are, in these horrific conditions and letting out methane gas that's, depleting our ozone layer. But do not for 1 minute kid yourself into believing that you are helping out your body. They are high in fat, sodium, all the things that we know are not health promoting.
And then the last one is about intermittent fasting. Is that something that again, that's tends to have been a trend in the last couple of years? Do you recommend?
Yeah, I'm a huge. I mean, so I love it. I love intermittent fasting. I do it myself, and it's a whole topic in and of itself. To answer it real quickly so that others are aware, intermittent fasting is basically just fasting for some period of time. So there's different ways of doing it. The most common is like a narrow feeding window. So you skip breakfast, your first meal is at lunchtime, your last meal is dinner at 6, and then no snacking after. So essentially you're eating for 6, fasting for 18 hours, right? Versus the average American, which eats breakfast at 8 a.m., midnight snack. So they're eating for 16 hours and fasting for 8, right? Everyone fasts. When you're asleep, you fast. So that's one way. Other ways of doing it is to like every week skip 1 day of food. And what I tell my patients is I want them to think about it in its rightful place. So I have this imaginary pyramid of health, okay? Just imagine a pyramid of health. Now, what's the most important part of a pyramid? It's the base. Right? It's the base, because the pyramid can't stand without a solid base. So what's at the base of my health pyramid when I'm talking to patients? A whole food plant-based diet, healthy ways of coping with stress, which includes a healthy work-life balance, at a minimum 6 hours, but ideally like 7+ hours of sleep per night. A deep sense of meaning and fulfillment. So I'm going to say that right now on a level of 1 to 10, if your fulfillment in your job is anywhere from a 1 to a 3, that's concerning. That would be a huge concern for me, because we know that was one of the power principles of the Blue Zones. They felt a deep sense of meaning and fulfillment. And it was one of the reasons I kept kind of going all these ways, because I really wanted to find, my fit, and I was fortunate to be able to do that, thanks in large part to the support of my parents. That's at the base of the pyramid. Movement, that's at the base of the pyramid, right? For some people, spirituality, that's at the base of the pyramid. I know for myself, spirituality is kind of front and center, and I see my whole world through that. Where does intermittent fasting fit into this whole thing? It's up here. Okay, it's the gravy. So I don't even talk about intermittent fasting for my patient who's coming to see me for the first time. If this patient, their whole base is intact, they're sleeping well, they love their job, they're getting home at a reasonable hour, they're sitting down with their family, and they have nice, generally healthy relationships. They're going for their exercise, and they're eating 90+% fruits, vegetables, legumes, and grains. And then now they want to talk about intermittent fasting. Let's do it. Like, that's just one more additive health behavior. But you can imagine someone who's fasting for 1 day a week and then having burgers, fries, and hot dogs because they thought that they've earned it through their 1 day fast. You can see how lopsided and sort of off base that is.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lim. This was, I mean, your goal to pique everyone's interest. You've done it.
Yeah, you think so?
Oh my gosh, yes. Especially,
Yeah.
for me, the before and after, and those dramatic changes are always just, it's so fascinating to see, what we are able to do and the power of food, right?
Absolutely.
Phenomenal.
Phenomenal.
Thank you very much. Thank you
Yeah,
very
thank you so much, Dr. Lim. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and keep looking back at our health and wellness webpage for our future content.